Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and hey, you can do this. Turn it on. Because this is Airwindows Longhand. Now it's going to take a little bit of explaining, but hopefully not too much. Longhand is a soft saturation that I did for the purposes of exploring how we do this digital math stuff a little harder. Let me show you something. If I click here, boop, look at that. Purest console channel instead. Do you know what purest console channel is? It is literally the math operation sine on the input signal coming in. Technically, it doesn't even have a clip factor to it, so it does what you call wavefolding. If you're not distorting, we don't notice that. So if we put this back and I bypass it, which it is currently bypassed, here's our raw signal. And if you want to hear what it sounds like to engage literally just only the math operation sine on this audio, we can do this. What that's going to do is clip the top off of that bass and apply a small amount of distortion. Now you don't really hear much of it. I'll turn it back off and back on. And that's because this particular math operation is a very gentle saturation. The way something like this works, if you were applying a sine transform to it, and again, if I boosted into it, it would actually wavefold. It would start wrapping around to go quiet again. But since we're not doing that, all you're getting is the single mathematical transform where the amount of change of saturation is the least possible change between two different distortion points, right? So the center of the sound remains at full volume, and then the farther you go over, the more it will clip. If you're just taking the literal input signal and applying sine to that, which is what's happening there, what's going to happen is it's going to saturate it to something that's slightly less than a maximum of 1. Because if you put in a signal that is 1.57, etc., in other words, half of pi, it will saturate over to be a complete flat top. And then as you continue, you'll saturate beyond there and wrap around, and that's called wavefolding. So what we're looking at here is literally just only a sine function. So you might ask, what's longhand? Longhand's this. I balanced it slightly differently. The way that input gain is operated, it's designed so that you can boost into it as hard as you can without actually saturating the output in such a way that it will clip the output. Because longhand is a sine calculation done in long double precision using a Taylor series approximation. So why would you do this when you've already got a perfectly good sine function? Because mathematical functions in digital operating systems and all that kind of stuff are designed to return results with various optimizations. For instance, in the sine function, it's a wavefolder, but we don't actually calculate the wavefolding with raw input data. And that's because you know what the wavefolding is going to do. If you have a signal that is a straight line and it just only goes up, it's always becoming higher. What you're going to get out of the output is a sine wave. It is continuing to wavefold the increasing value in such a way that it will return the sine wave on the output. But all it really has to do is calculate out 1/4 of that, maybe with some sort of lookup table or whatever. Different processors handle this differently. In order to do that 1/4 calculation, and then you mirror it on the other end so it goes back down, and then you do it negative for the rest of the sine wave. And so you're building a sine wave if you're doing the math in modern compilers and so on. You've got possibly a speeded up sine wave calculation, or if it's a high precision calculation, you're probably still breaking it into quadrants. But the Taylor series does not do that. The Taylor series is the mathematical way of making that output happen. And the way it's working is increasingly large powers of a number being added in increasingly tiny ways. So what you've got is your saturation is causing some of it to become clamped down to the point where it will even wrap around. But then as you keep going, there is another power of that number that is applying a negative amount, and that is causing it to bend back up again. And if you have a non-infinite series of these things, it will inevitably break and freak out at some point because it's doing all of that calculation longhand. As a result, it can't simply keep adding more powers of the number. Instead, what it's going to do is eventually get to a point where there is no further correction to be had, and then the power function will just go crazy, and it'll go whoop and be gone. This is what I've guarded against with the way I set the input level. It's set up so it's approximately the same volume. I don't remember exactly what it is. You can hear that there's a tiny bump. I may have set it so that a 1-to-1 output gives you a 1-to-1 output. But we can also do this. A hard clip. And you get a little bit of a sense of that wavefoldiness. But it's not truly what you'd get out of a sine function, because this has been captured. There's a hard clip going in where it's not going to feed it values larger than 1 or -1. And then the rest of it has been worked out so that it's also not clipping even when you drive it this hard. And it'll go into a couple of series of wavefoldings and then it stops. And that's longhand. And in fact, you can actually, that's interesting. You know what? Dry wet is doing a thing. Pretty sure what this is doing is letting you crossfade to what the same volume would be going through the input, so that's interesting. So you don't actually get to use dry wet to blend a heavily saturated version of the output, or indeed at all. You could set it up so that it does the same degree of saturation, and then you'll get the actual output, but you know what, that's about enough of that. Here's the thing. This is just more experimentation that I do. So, make a little mental note that dry does that, because I'm not going to go back and fix it, because this is not for using directly. Much like the ditherfloat plugin wasn't for using directly. This is part of an ongoing process through which I find stuff like this Taylor series approximation process, and try to get it to do stuff. Nobody asked me to do a longhand version of a sine function. That's just experimentation on my part because I was trying to see whether it sounded better. The fact that the dry wet is actually behaving like it's taking the wavefolding aspect of it, and you can pad that, but dry isn't the input dry is instead something else. I don't know. I have to move forwards. The reason this is coming out is because I wasn't able to complete the plugins that I was working on last week. Because the plugins I was working on last week were an update to Dynamics, where I had Dynamics. Dynamics 3 has gone through like 3 revisions. Each time I had to do it over again from scratch. Because first I was able to bring in a sort of very-mute style behavior. And then secondly, it occurred to me that I could try doing a expansion working about the same way. And I ended up getting very good results out of it, but nothing I'd really heard before. It's not quite an expander, it's not quite a gate, it's something in between somehow, and it follows its own rules, much like this plugin is clearly following its own rules. Maybe just use the output and don't mess with the dry wet. I'm not going to be able to come back and revise it. I have too much else to do. Similarly, I have an update on the newest BES-EQ because I was able to adjust the frequency positionings of it so that it acted a little bit more like Smooth EQ2 and gave you slower roll-offs between the shelf bands that we have in there. And all of this is towards me being able to put out Console X3 using all of this stuff. So, and on top of all of that, I had a deadline where I rented a dumpster for some spring cleaning for the purposes of filling it up with garbage so I can reposition some of my stuff and get working on building hardware for people. And then I also had to do it before 2 cords of firewood came in. And at the end of this video, what I'm going to do is play another video, which was me showing something that went into the dumpster. It's a joystick that I made that's no longer useful to anybody, but before it was thrown away, I wanted to show off what I did when I was a kid, back in the day, on a Performa 575 computer that ran at 33 megahertz. And I was playing air combat games and was trying to be better through inventing things. And yeah, I'm still inventing things, and the things I'm inventing are apparently still janky. But, you know, I got to move forwards. There's more to do. I can't not post Longhand today just because the dry wet didn't work the way that I thought. Maybe you'll find some use for it somewhere. Or maybe, I don't know, there will be some kind of purpose to it in some way. But you could always gain stage it or something. I don't know. But yeah, I got to get back to work. I have 2 more videos to make today before I can resume working on all the other things going on. One of them is for $10 and up patrons. I really appreciate the $10 and up patrons because this is the second month I cannot fully pay my bills. That said, when I say that, what I mean is I don't get to pay off the credit card completely and entirely, which I think a lot of people know what that feels like, but I've been trying to avoid it, and I can no longer avoid it, so I really appreciate the $10 and up patrons. I'm glad I'm making special videos for them. This week's special video is a little exploration of Eric Clapton's, and I just did this too. And I can't see it because on the screen over there is actually the joystick video you're about to see, the Willie and the Hand Drive. I'll talk a little bit for the $10 and up patrons and play that song in its entirety and talk a little bit about interesting things having to do with the organ sounds. and the kind of texture coming out of them, the way that stuff works. And then for the forbidden music, this last week so much was going on that I forgot to post it on Wednesday, but I got there in the end. And we're going to do another Beatles track. I am using Beatles' Birthday for this week's forbidden music. And so you'll get to hear what hard rock, obviously intended to be a hit record, Beatles sounds and measures like. Until then, I'll talk to you later, and enjoy the little clip of the joystick that I made back basically when I was a kid. It's gone, but we can remember it. And I ain't gone yet. I'm fighting away with all of this stuff. I'm going to have a bunch of plugins to finish up and get right. I'll be putting them out, and I'll be working towards other things. For instance, there's a version of Purist Console that replaces the one that you saw when I showed just the sine version of it. I have a version in Purist Console coming out, which is entirely done using longhand methods. It's entirely done using a longhand method for the sine and a longhand method for the arcsine. Will it sound better than other versions of Purist Console? We'll find out together. Talk to you later. Bye-bye. Hey, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and I'm hanging out with something that I made once before it goes into the dumpster where it will meet its end. What is this thing? It is a joystick for flight simulators that I made myself out of plumbing parts. It's possible that it still works. It's also possible that it does not. So here's how you do a thing like this. This started out as a joystick of some sort. You'll notice that the cable is Apple desktop bus cable. It's got a little extension for if you want to connect multiple Apple desktop bus things. This is old school. These are rudder pedals. The whole thing is plumbing parts soldered together, and the springs are inner tubes, and it is a joystick with kind of a lot of travel. You can dive like that or pull back. You see there's a brass thing that goes around to sort of the guts of potentiometers there, and it just took them all out of the joystick that they came from. I think it was a CH Products, and built it into this because I was playing a game called Air Warrior on my 68K Macintosh Performa 575, and I couldn't play well enough, so I thought I would try to use technology to make myself be able to play better. So you can see that's soldered on in there, and then there's a little loop of copper, which is what the potentiometers are connected to in there. And it really worked. And it's been in my basement for, oh boy, what, over 30 years? Looks it. And it's going into a dumpster because there is no use for it anymore. See, it's assembled with duct tape. The duct tape is still good. There's strapping tape holding the foam pads on here. These are just looped around with bent copper. But the bulk of it is assembled with plumbing parts and soldered together. And here at the top is the joystick from the CH Products joystick. So there you go. Full-size airplane cockpit out of random parts and junk. A little glimpse of previous Chris back when I was little. Talk to you later.